Marcus Chen had always been particular about his morning coffee. Black, 2 sugars, served at exactly 7:15 a.m. in his favorite ceramic mug. For 3 years, Zara had prepared it perfectly every single day without fail. She moved through his penthouse apartment with an almost supernatural grace, her pale blue skin catching the morning light as she glided between rooms. Most humans in New Geneva kept alien domestic staff as a status symbol. The Catherian refugees had arrived on Earth 15 years ago, their sleek ships limping into orbit after what their leaders claimed was a catastrophic civil war on their homeworld. They were beautiful creatures, tall and elegant with luminescent skin that shifted between blue and silver depending on their mood. Perfect servants, they said, grateful to work for the species that had offered them sanctuary. Marcus watched Zara dust his collection of ancient Earth artifacts, her 4-fingered hands moving with mechanical precision. She never spoke unless spoken to, never met his eyes directly, never showed any emotion beyond the faint silver glow that seemed to be her species' default state. He had grown comfortable with her presence over the years, even fond of it in a way. She was reliable, efficient, and unobtrusive. "The Henderson contract files are on my desk," he told her as he straightened his tie. "Make sure they're organized by priority when I return tonight." "Of course, Mr. Chen," she replied in her soft, melodic voice that always seemed to carry an odd resonance. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Marcus felt that familiar pang of something he couldn't quite name. Loneliness, perhaps, though he had grown used to living alone since his divorce. The penthouse was too quiet without Zara's subtle movements, too empty without her careful attention to every detail of his life. At Chen Industries, Marcus threw himself into his work as usual. The terraforming contracts with the outer colonies were becoming increasingly complex, requiring delicate negotiations with multiple alien species. Humans had become the galaxy's premier mediators, their natural adaptability and diplomatic skills making them invaluable in interspecies relations. It was profitable work, and Marcus had built his fortune on humanity's unique talent for finding common ground. During his lunch meeting with the Andromedan trade delegation, Ambassador Kelrix made an offhand comment that stuck with him. "Your species has such an interesting relationship with the Catherians," the insectoid alien clicked through his translator. "We have never encountered a civilization that so willingly accepted refugees without proper documentation of their origins." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean by proper documentation?" Kelrix's compound eyes glittered. "Simply that the Catherian exodus was unusual. Most species keep detailed records of civil conflicts, refugee movements, ship manifests. The Galactic Archive contains extensive documentation for every major population displacement in the past millennium, except for the Catherians." The comment nagged at Marcus throughout the afternoon. He had never questioned the official story about the Catherian refugees. Why would he? They had integrated seamlessly into human society, taking jobs that humans often found tedious, asking for little in return except basic shelter and sustenance. They were model refugees, almost too perfect. That evening, Marcus returned home earlier than usual. The penthouse was immaculate as always, every surface gleaming, every object in its proper place. Zara emerged from the kitchen as he entered, her skin shifting to a warmer blue tone that he had learned indicated mild concern. "You are home early today, Mr. Chen. Are you feeling unwell?" "Just tired," he said, loosening his tie. "Zara, can I ask you something?" She paused, her luminescent skin flickering almost imperceptibly. "Of course. What was your homeworld like? Before the war?" For a moment, something flickered across her features. Fear, sadness. The emotion was gone so quickly, Marcus wondered if he had imagined it. Her skin returned to its neutral silver. "It was a peaceful place," she said carefully. "Many cities, much like Earth. The war changed everything." "What caused the war?" Again, that brief flicker of something deeper. "Political differences. Philosophical disagreements that became violent. Many of us chose to leave rather than participate in the destruction of our civilization." Her answers felt rehearsed, like lines from a script. Marcus studied her face, noting the way she avoided his direct gaze, the slight tension in her posture. In 3 years, he had never seen her truly relaxed, never witnessed a moment of genuine emotion that wasn't carefully controlled. "Zara," he said gently, "are you happy here?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her skin shifted through several colors rapidly, blue to silver to a deep purple he had never seen before. When she looked up at him, her large violet eyes held something that looked almost like panic. "I am content to serve. Mr. Chen, that is what we do." "That's not what I asked." She turned away, busying herself with unnecessary straightening of already perfect cushions. Happiness is not a concept that translates well between our species. But Marcus had seen something in those violet eyes, something that suggested her understanding of happiness was far more complex than she pretended. As he watched her move around the room, he began to notice things he had overlooked before. The way she sometimes paused at the large windows overlooking the city, staring out at the stars, the careful way she handled his collection of human artifacts, as if studying them rather than simply cleaning them, the fact that she had never once mentioned family, friends, or any connection to the Catherian community beyond their shared employment placement agency. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he found himself thinking about Ambassador Kelrix's words. No documentation, no records. For a species as advanced as the Catherians claimed to be, the lack of historical evidence was indeed unusual. And Zara's reaction to his questions had been far from typical for someone simply sharing memories of home. Something was not right. And for the first time in 3 years, Marcus realized he might not know his alien mate at all. Marcus couldn't shake his growing suspicions about Zara over the next few days. He found himself observing her more carefully, noting patterns he had previously dismissed as quirks of her alien nature. She never ate the food provided for Catherian staff, always claiming she had already consumed her nutritional supplements. She never received personal communications, never took days off, never showed any interest in connecting with other members of her species. During his morning routine, Marcus decided to test something. He casually mentioned that he would be attending a function at the Catherian Cultural Center that evening, watching her reaction carefully. Zara's skin immediately shifted to that deep purple color he had only seen once before, and she dropped the tablet she had been holding. "You are interested in Catherian culture, Mr. Chen?" she asked, her voice carrying an odd strain. "I thought it might be educational. Perhaps you could recommend what I should expect?" The silence stretched between them as Zara stood frozen, clearly struggling with something. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I would not recommend attending such gatherings. They are not representative of true Catherian ways." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" But Zara had already retreated into her usual composed demeanor, her skin returning to neutral silver. "I merely meant that formal cultural presentations often lack authenticity. Perhaps your time would be better spent elsewhere." That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct about privacy and trust. He installed a discreet monitoring system in his apartment, cameras so small they were virtually undetectable. If Zara was hiding something, he needed to know what it was. The thought of spying on her made his stomach turn, but Ambassador Kelrix's words about the lack of documentation had planted a seed of doubt that was growing rapidly. When he returned home that evening, Zara greeted him as usual, but Marcus noticed she seemed more subdued than normal. Her movements were still graceful, but there was a tension in her posture that suggested deep anxiety. As they went through their normal evening routine, Marcus found himself studying every detail of her behavior. "Will you require anything else tonight, Mr. Chen?" she asked as he settled into his study with a glass of wine. "No, thank you. Feel free to retire whenever you're ready." After she had withdrawn to her quarters, Marcus waited an hour before accessing the monitoring feed on his personal tablet. What he saw in the recording from earlier that day made his blood run cold. The moment his elevator had descended, Zara had transformed. Her careful, submissive movements became swift and purposeful. She had gone directly to his computer terminal and accessed files with a speed and expertise that spoke of extensive technical training. But it wasn't just corporate espionage that shocked him. As she worked, she spoke in a language that definitely wasn't Catherian, her voice carrying a authority and intelligence that bore no resemblance to the meek servant he knew. More disturbing was what happened next. Zara had stood before his full-length mirror, and her appearance had begun to shift. Her skin color deepened and took on a more natural human tone. Her height decreased by several inches. Her facial features rearranged themselves subtly, becoming more angular, more familiar. For a brief moment, Marcus was looking at something that appeared almost human. Then she had caught sight of something in the reflection, spun around with lightning reflexes, and stared directly at one of the hidden cameras. Her violet eyes held an intelligence and calculation that sent chills down Marcus's spine. She had known about the surveillance all along. The feed showed her returning to her Cytherian appearance within moments, but the damage was done. Marcus now knew that everything about Zara was a carefully constructed lie. She wasn't Cytherian. She wasn't even necessarily alien, and she had been playing a role for 3 years with an expertise that suggested professional training. Marcus set down the tablet with shaking hands. If Zara wasn't who she claimed to be, then what was she? A spy, an assassin? And why had she spent 3 years in his home, serving coffee and dusting furniture while secretly accessing his most sensitive business files? A soft sound from the hallway made him freeze. Footsteps too quiet for human ears but audible to someone listening carefully. Marcus realized with growing dread that Zara was moving through the apartment, and her careful servant's glide had been replaced by the silent, predatory movements of someone trained in stealth. He considered his options quickly. His panic room was across the apartment, but reaching it would require passing through the main living area where Zara was currently moving. His personal communicator could alert building security, but if Zara was as dangerous as his instincts now suggested, help might not arrive in time. The footsteps stopped outside his study door. "Mr. Chen?" Zara's voice carried its usual melodic quality, but underneath it Marcus detected something new. A cold professionalism that raised every alarm bell in his mind. "I believe we need to discuss what you have discovered tonight." Marcus slowly reached for the drawer where he kept a small plasma pistol, a precaution he had never thought he would need in his own home. "Come in, Zara. Let's talk." The door opened and the figure that entered looked like Zara but moved with the fluid confidence of a trained operative. Her violet eyes met his without the usual deference, and Marcus saw intelligence there that was both alien and familiar. "You may keep your weapon if it makes you feel safer," she said, settling gracefully into the chair across from his desk. "But I assure you, if I intended you harm, you would already be dead." Marcus kept his hand near the drawer but didn't draw the weapon. "What are you?" For the first time in 3 years, Zara smiled. It was a predator's smile, beautiful and terrifying. "That, Mr. Chen, is a far more complicated question than you might imagine. But I think it's time you learned the truth about why your species has become so important to the galaxy, and why someone like me has been living in your home for 3 years." Her skin began to shift again, colors flowing like liquid metal, and Marcus realized he was about to discover that everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the universe was about to change forever. Zara's transformation was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. Her Cytherian features melted away like a holographic projection being switched off, revealing something far more complex underneath. Her skin settled into a deep bronze color with subtle geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Her height increased, her bone structure shifted, and when the change was complete, Marcus found himself looking at a being that was distinctly non-human yet hauntingly beautiful. "My name is not Zara," she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated in ways that made Marcus's teeth ache. "I am Commander Thrix of the Hegemony Intelligence Division. I have been studying your species for the past 7 years, 3 of which I have spent in your household." Marcus gripped the edge of his desk, struggling to process what he was seeing. "The hegemony? I've never heard of any hegemony." "Of course not. Your species exists in a carefully maintained bubble of ignorance, protected from the larger galactic conflicts by geography and your own remarkable naivety." Thrix stood and walked to the window, her movements now predatory and confident. "Tell me, Mr. Chen, what do you know about humanity's expansion into space? We've colonized 17 systems, established trade relationships with 43 alien species, and become respected mediators in interstellar disputes," Marcus recited automatically. Thrix laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Respected mediators? Is that what you think you are?" She turned back to him, her eyes now a shifting kaleidoscope of colors. "Mr. Chen, your species hasn't established trade relationships. You've been carefully managed, guided, and manipulated into serving a very specific purpose in galactic politics." The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You're saying we're being used?" "I'm saying you're being prepared." Thrix moved back to her chair, but this time she didn't sit. Instead, she leaned against the back with casual authority. "The galaxy is divided into 3 major power blocks, Mr. Chen. The hegemony, which represents the older, more established civilizations. The Alliance, which consists of younger, more aggressive species, and the Neutral Zone, a buffer region where smaller civilizations try to maintain independence. Marcus felt the world shifting beneath his feet. Where do humans fit into this? Nowhere. And everywhere. Thrix's expression became almost fond. Your species is unique, Mr. Chen. You have something that every other civilization in the galaxy has lost or never possessed. You have the ability to genuinely empathize with other species while maintaining your own distinct identity. That doesn't sound particularly special. It's the rarest trait in the known universe. Thrix began pacing, her energy barely contained. Most species fall into one of two categories when they encounter others. They either become aggressive and territorial, or they become absorbed and lose their cultural identity. Humans do neither. You adapt without losing yourselves, and you understand others without becoming them. Marcus thought about his work, the countless negotiations he had facilitated between species that seemed to have nothing in common. You're talking about diplomatic ability. I'm talking about a genetic predisposition toward what your psychologists call cognitive empathy, combined with an unusual resistance to cultural assimilation. It's made your species incredibly valuable as intermediaries, but that's not why the hegemony has been watching you. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. What do you mean? Thrix stopped pacing and fixed him with a stare that seemed to look right through him. The war that's coming, Mr. Chen. The war that will determine the fate of every sentient species in this galaxy. The hegemony and the Alliance have been positioning themselves for this conflict for over a century. Every trade agreement, every colony established, every diplomatic mission has been a move in a vast strategic game. And humans? Humans are the prize. Thrix's skin patterns pulsed with increased intensity. The species that controls humanity will have access to the most effective mediators, negotiators, and cultural bridges in galactic history. More importantly, they'll have access to humanity's other unique trait. Marcus felt his mouth go dry, which is your species' remarkable ability to inspire loyalty and cooperation in others. Every alien species that has worked closely with humans develops what can only be described as affection for your people. It's unprecedented in galactic politics. The revelation hit Marcus like a tsunami. Everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the galaxy, their success as mediators, their expanding influence, was part of a larger design. The refugees, he said slowly. The Catherians, the Vorthan laborers, the Centauri students. They're all intelligence operatives. Not all, Thrix corrected, but enough. The hegemony has been infiltrating human society for decades, documenting your capabilities, studying your psychology, preparing for the moment when your species would need to choose sides. Marcus stood abruptly, anger overriding his fear. Choose sides? We never agreed to be part of your war. You don't get to choose whether to participate, Mr. Chen. You only get to choose which side you're on. Thrix's expression softened slightly. The Alliance has been conducting their own infiltration program. Every human colony beyond the core systems has Alliance agents embedded within the population. Every trade negotiation you've participated in has been monitored and analyzed by both sides. And you? Why are you telling me this? For the first time since her transformation, Thrix looked uncertain. Because in 3 years of observing you, I've come to understand something that my superiors didn't anticipate. Which is, humans aren't just good at inspiring loyalty in other species. You inspire loyalty in your enemies. Thrix's skin pattern shifted to what Marcus somehow understood was vulnerability. I was sent to study you, to compile intelligence that would help the hegemony control your species when the time came. Instead, I've spent 3 years watching you treat me with kindness and respect, despite believing I was nothing more than hired help. Marcus stared at her, pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. You're defecting. I'm choosing a side, Thrix corrected. The question is whether your species will be ready to make the same choice when the war begins. Outside the window, the lights of New Geneva stretched toward the horizon, each one representing thousands of human lives going about their daily routines, completely unaware that their species had become the center of a galactic conflict that would soon determine the future of civilization itself. Marcus looked back at Thrix. This alien warrior who had spent 3 years serving him coffee and cleaning his apartment while gathering intelligence for a war. Humanity didn't know it was already fighting. When? He asked simply. Soon, Thrix replied. The Alliance is preparing to make their move. When they do, the hegemony will respond, and your species will be forced to choose between servitude and alliance. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What can one human do against galactic superpowers? Thrix smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuine rather than predatory. You can do what humans do best, Mr. Chen. You can bring people together. The following days passed in a blur of revelations and planning. Thrix had activated something called a neural damper that would prevent her from being tracked by hegemony surveillance, but it also meant they had limited time before her absence was noticed. She used every moment to educate Marcus about the true state of galactic politics. The Alliance calls themselves Liberators, Thrix explained as she projected holographic star maps in his study. They believe that younger species should overthrow the established order and claim their rightful place as the dominant civilizations. They see humans as potential allies in this cause. Marcus studied the complex web of territories and influence zones displayed before him. And the hegemony? We believe in stability and order. The galaxy has known peace for 3 centuries under the current system. The hegemony sees humans as the key to maintaining that peace. Thrix's expression darkened. Both sides are wrong about what humanity needs, but both are right about what humanity can provide. Which is the ability to unite disparate species under a common cause. The Alliance wants to use this ability to overthrow the current order. The hegemony wants to use it to maintain control. Either side understands that humanity's true power lies in creating something entirely new. Marcus felt a spark of understanding. A third option, exactly. But creating that option will require something that has never been attempted in galactic history. Thrix manipulated the hologram, highlighting the neutral zone between the 2 major power blocks. It will require convincing dozens of independent species to work together as equals, without any single power dominating the Alliance. The magnitude of what she was suggesting hit Marcus like a freight train. You're talking about revolution. I'm talking about evolution. The current system is based on domination and submission. The Alliance wants to change who's on top, but they still believe in hierarchy. Humanity has the potential to create something based on cooperation and mutual benefit. Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the city where millions of humans lived their lives unaware of the cosmic chess game being played around them. Even if that's possible, how could we possibly coordinate something like that? We don't even have contact with most of the neutral species. That's where your corporate connections become invaluable, Thrix said, joining him at the window. Chen Industries has subsidiaries and partners throughout human space. You have contacts in 17 systems and relationships with 43 alien species. More importantly, you have something the galaxy has never seen before, which is a multi-species corporation based on actual equality rather than exploitation. Thrix pulled up financial records on her portable projector. I've been analyzing your business practices for 3 years, Mr. Chen. Every alien species that works with Chen Industries reports higher satisfaction rates and better working conditions than they experience with other human companies. You've been accidentally building the model for interspecies cooperation. Marcus looked at the data, seeing his business relationships in an entirely new light. I just treated people fairly. Exactly. And that's why they trust you. Trust that could be extended into political cooperation if presented correctly. Thrix's skin patterns shifted to what Marcus now recognized as excitement. There are 47 species in the neutral zone that have maintained independence from both major power blocks. If they could be convinced to form a true alliance based on equality and mutual defense, they could present a third option when the war begins. And you think humans could lead something like that? I think humans are the only species that could lead something like that without destroying it through internal power struggles. Thrix turned to face him directly. But it has to begin now before the Alliance makes their move. Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we use your business network to make contact with neutral species and begin building the framework for a new kind of alliance. We start with trade relationships and cultural exchanges, then gradually introduce the concept of mutual defense and political cooperation. Thrix's expression became vulnerable again. I told you that I've chosen a side, Mr. Chen. I want to help humanity create this new path, but I can't do it alone. I need someone that neutral species will trust, someone with a proven track record of fair dealing and honest negotiation. Marcus considered the enormity of what she was asking. If we're caught, both the hegemony and the alliance will consider us traitors. If we succeed, neither will matter. If we fail, the war will happen anyway, and humanity will be forced to choose between two forms of servitude. Thrix moved closer, her strange eyes holding depths of hope and determination. But if we do nothing, your species will never know that there was another choice. The decision crystallized in Marcus's mind with startling clarity. Everything in his life had led to this moment: his business success, his diplomatic skills, even his relationship with Thrix. What do we do first? We start with the species you already know. The Centauri Collective has been looking for alternatives to both major power blocks for decades. The Andromedan Trade Federation values independence above all else. The Vegan Republic has been quietly building their own network of neutral allies. Thrix pulled up a new display showing communication routes and trade patterns. We invite them to a private conference ostensibly about expanding trade relationships. Once they're together, we present the larger vision. Marcus nodded slowly. And if they refuse? Then we try the next group and the next until we find species willing to take the risk. Thrix's patterns pulsed with determination, but I don't think they'll refuse. Every neutral species is afraid of what's coming. We'll be offering them hope instead of inevitability. Over the next week, Marcus threw himself into the project with an intensity that surprised even him. Using his corporate connections, he began reaching out to alien contacts throughout the neutral territories. The responses were cautiously positive. Most species were indeed interested in expanded trade relationships, and several expressed private concerns about the growing tensions between the major power blocks. Thrix worked tirelessly to provide intelligence about each species' political situation, cultural preferences, and potential concerns. Her knowledge was encyclopedic, covering not just military and political intelligence, but detailed analyses of economic systems, social structures, and diplomatic protocols. You really were studying us, Marcus said one evening as they reviewed preparations for the upcoming conference. I was studying you specifically, Thrix corrected. Your psychological profile, your decision-making patterns, your ethical framework. I needed to understand how a typical human would react to various scenarios. And what did you conclude? That there's no such thing as a typical human. Your species' greatest strength is your individuality combined with your ability to cooperate despite your differences. Thrix looked up from her datapad. It's also why the hegemony's control strategies were doomed to fail. You can't control a species that values individual conscience over institutional authority. Marcus felt a surge of pride in his species, followed immediately by concern. What happens when the hegemony realizes you've defected? They'll send someone to retrieve me. Probably someone I trained. Thrix's expression became grim. We need to have the framework of our alliance established before that happens. Once neutral species begin formally cooperating, it becomes much harder for either major power to force individual species into compliance. The conference was scheduled for the following week on Kepler Station, a neutral trading post at the intersection of several major shipping routes. 12 species had agreed to attend, representing nearly half of the neutral zone's significant civilizations. As Marcus reviewed the final preparations, he realized that in less than 2 weeks his entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt. He was no longer just a successful businessman living a comfortable life. He had become a revolutionary, working to reshape the political structure of the galaxy itself. Looking at Thrix as she coordinated security arrangements and diplomatic protocols, Marcus felt a profound gratitude for whatever cosmic coincidence had brought her into his life. She had given him the chance to be part of something larger than himself, something that could change the course of history. Ready? She asked, looking up from her preparations. Marcus nodded, feeling more ready than he had ever felt for anything in his life. Let's go change the galaxy. Kepler Station buzzed with activity as representatives from 12 different species arrived for what they believed was an expanded trade conference. Marcus watched from the observation deck as sleek Centauri vessels docked alongside the geometric ships of the Andromedan Federation and the organic-looking craft of the Vegan Republic. Each species brought their own security details, cultural attachés, and trade specialists, creating a diplomatic environment unlike anything he had ever experienced. Thrix moved through the station like a ghost, her appearance now locked in a form that appeared to be a rare but documented humanoid species from the Outer Rim. She had taught Marcus to recognize the subtle signs of other intelligence operatives, and he was disturbed to realize that nearly every delegation included at least one individual who was almost certainly not what they appeared to be. Both sides are watching, Thrix confirmed during their private briefing the night before the conference began. I've identified at least 6 hegemony assets and 4 alliance infiltrators among the various delegations. Will they interfere? Not directly. Both sides want to see what develops before they act, but everything we say and do will be reported back to their respective commands. Thrix's current features showed concern. We need to be very careful about how we present our proposal. If either side perceives an immediate threat, they could move to break up the conference. The first day of meetings proceeded exactly as advertised. Detailed discussions about trade routes, resource sharing, and cultural exchange programs. Marcus played his role perfectly, the enthusiastic human businessman eager to expand his corporate reach into new markets. But he was also carefully observing the interactions between species, noting which delegates seemed genuinely interested in cooperation versus those who appeared to be going through diplomatic motions. During the evening reception, Marcus found himself in conversation with Ambassador Vex of the Centauri Collective, a species known for their philosophical approach to politics. The Centauri were tall, graceful beings with silver skin and large, multifaceted eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Your species fascinates us, Mr. Chen, Vex said, his voice carrying harmonic overtones that created an almost musical quality. In our observations, humans display a unique ability to form genuine friendships across species barriers. It is a rare gift in a galaxy where most relationships are based on mutual advantage. Marcus seized the opening. Ambassador, can I speak frankly with you? I would prefer it. Do you ever wonder if there might be alternatives to the current political structure? Ways for independent species to cooperate without losing their autonomy to larger power blocks? Vex's multifaceted eyes glittered with interest. Often, the Centauri have maintained our independence for over 2 centuries, but we are increasingly pressured to choose sides in conflicts that are not of our making. What if there was another choice? Before Vex could respond, they were joined by Commander Zelak of the Andromedan Trade Federation, a massive insectoid whose species valued directness above all else. Forgive the interruption, but I could not help overhearing. Are you suggesting some form of neutral alliance, Mr. Chen? Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but he maintained his composure. I'm suggesting that independent species might benefit from closer cooperation. Not political absorption, but genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared interests. Interesting, Zelak clicked through his translator. The Federation has long believed that smaller civilizations must work together to maintain independence from the major powers. But every attempt at neutral cooperation has failed due to internal power struggles. Perhaps because they were structured like miniature versions of the major power blocks, suggested Dr. Sina of the Vegan Republic, who had quietly joined their conversation. The Vegans were plant-based entities whose appearance shifted subtly with their emotional states. Hierarchy breeds conflict. Cooperation requires equality. Over the next hour, their small group was joined by representatives from 6 other species, all drawn by the possibility of discussing alternatives to the increasingly dangerous galactic political situation. Marcus found himself at the center of a spontaneous diplomatic revolution, with beings who had never seriously considered working together, suddenly exploring the possibility of a new kind of alliance. Thrix watched from across the room, her expression carefully neutral but her posture tense. Marcus knew she was monitoring the reactions of the various intelligence operatives scattered throughout the reception. So far, their conversation appeared to be drawing interest rather than alarm from the watchers, but that could change quickly if their discussion became too specific. The theoretical framework is appealing, admitted Ambassador Krath of the Silicon Collective, a crystalline being whose species communicated through harmonic resonance, but implementation would require unprecedented trust between species with vastly different cultural and biological needs. Trust can be built through small steps, Marcus said carefully. Joint scientific ventures, cultural exchange programs, mutual defense agreements that respect each species' sovereignty. You speak of mutual defense, observed Captain Thane of the Rigel Commonwealth, a militaristic species that had been fighting border skirmishes with alliance forces for decades. Would such an alliance be prepared to defend members against aggression from the major powers? The question hung in the air like a challenge. This was the moment when their informal discussion would either become a serious political proposal or dissolve into diplomatic niceties. Marcus looked around the circle of alien faces, seeing hope, fear, and desperate curiosity in equal measure. "I believe," Marcus said carefully, "that any alliance worth forming would be prepared to defend the sovereignty of its members against any threat, regardless of the source." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Ambassador Vex spoke, his harmonic voice carrying a note of excitement. "Are you formally proposing the creation of such an alliance, Mr. Chen?" Marcus felt the weight of galactic history pressing down on him. Once he answered this question, there would be no going back. Either he would become the founder of a new political order, or he would become a marked man targeted by the two most powerful military forces in the galaxy. He looked across the room at Thrix, who gave him the slightest nod of encouragement. "Yes," Marcus said simply, "I am." The reaction was immediate and electric. Several delegates began speaking at once in their native languages, while others stood in stunned silence. Dr. Cena's plant-like features shifted to colors that Marcus had learned indicated intense excitement, while Captain Thane's military bearing became even more rigid as he calculated the implications of what had just been proposed. "This is either the most brilliant or the most suicidal diplomatic initiative I have ever witnessed," declared Commander Zelak. With what Marcus had learned was Andromedan. "Approval, perhaps both," agreed Ambassador Vex. "But if Mr. Chen is serious about this proposal, then we should discuss specifics. How would such an alliance be structured? What would membership require? How would decisions be made?" As the group began diving into the practical details of creating an entirely new form of interstellar government, Marcus realized that they had just crossed a line from which there was no return. Word of this conversation would reach both the hegemony and the alliance within hours, and both sides would be forced to decide how to respond to the emergence of a potential third power. Looking around the circle of beings who were suddenly his partners in revolution, Marcus felt a surge of pride in his species. Humans hadn't just stumbled into becoming galactic mediators. They had been unconsciously preparing for this moment for decades. Every successful negotiation, every peaceful resolution, every friendship formed across species lines had been building toward this. The moment when humanity would offer the galaxy something it had never had before, a choice that didn't require anyone to kneel. The emergency session convened at 300 station time, long after the official conference had ended. 9 of the 12 species had agreed to participate in what Marcus now thought of as the most important meeting in galactic history. The 3 holdouts hadn't refused outright, but had requested time to consult with their governments before committing to anything so revolutionary. The private conference room Thrix had secured was shielded against electronic surveillance, but Marcus knew that wouldn't stop determined intelligence operatives from finding ways to monitor their discussions. Every word they spoke would be analyzed by both major powers, looking for any indication of the new alliance's capabilities and intentions. "Before we begin," said Ambassador Vex, "I believe we should address the obvious question. Mr. Chen, you are a human businessman with no official government authority. What gives you the right to negotiate on behalf of your species?" It was a fair question, and one that Marcus had been dreading. "I don't have official authority," he admitted, "but I have something that might be more important. The ability to speak for the principles that humanity values most. Individual freedom, voluntary cooperation, and the right of every sentient being to determine their own destiny." "Pretty words," observed Captain Thane skeptically. "But can you deliver human support for this alliance without government backing?" Marcus looked at Thrix, who had been conspicuously quiet during the preliminary discussions. She gave him a subtle nod, indicating that it was time to reveal one of their carefully prepared surprises. "I can deliver more than government backing," Marcus said, pulling up a holographic display that showed a complex web of corporate and financial connections. Chen Industries has subsidiaries and partnerships throughout human space, employing over 2 million beings across 17 systems. But more importantly, we're not alone. The display shifted to show similar networks radiating out from other major human corporations, all connected through trade relationships, joint ventures, and shared infrastructure projects. Over the past week, I've been in contact with the CEOs of 47 major human corporations. They're all facing the same pressures from the major power blocks, and they're all interested in alternatives. Dr. Sina's features shifted to colors indicating amazement. You're proposing a corporate-backed political alliance? I'm proposing something unprecedented, Marcus corrected. An alliance where economic cooperation leads to political cooperation, rather than the other way around. Instead of governments negotiating treaties that businesses must follow, we start with voluntary economic partnerships that gradually develop political frameworks. Commander Zelak's compound eyes glittered with interest. Fascinating. Such an approach would be much more flexible than traditional diplomatic structures, and much more difficult for the major powers to control, added Ambassador Krath, his crystalline form resonating with harmonic approval. They can threaten governments, but they cannot easily threaten distributed economic networks. Over the next 6 hours, they worked through the practical details of what would become known as the Kepler Accords. Rather than a traditional military alliance, they designed a flexible framework based on economic cooperation, cultural exchange, and mutual defense through collective action rather than centralized command. Each member species would maintain complete sovereignty over their internal affairs. Economic partnerships would be voluntary and based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Cultural exchange programs would promote understanding without forced assimilation. And most importantly, the alliance would defend any member against aggression through coordinated response rather than hierarchical military command. The beauty of this system, explained Thrix during a brief recess, is that it's almost impossible to destroy through conventional means. There's no capital to capture, no central government to overthrow, no single point of failure that would collapse the entire structure. Marcus nodded, feeling a growing sense of excitement about what they were creating. It's based on relationships rather than institutions. Even if individual members are temporarily overwhelmed, the network itself survives. When they reconvened, Ambassador Vex raised the crucial question that Marcus had been both anticipating and dreading. How do we expect the major powers to respond to our alliance? Initially with skepticism, Marcus said honestly. Both the hegemony and the alliance will assume that we're either too weak to matter, or that we'll eventually be forced to choose sides. They won't take us seriously until we demonstrate our effectiveness. And when they do take us seriously, pressed Captain Thane, they'll try to break us apart through a combination of bribes, threats, and divide-and-conquer tactics, Thrix said, speaking for the first time during the formal negotiations. Her current appearance drew curious glances from several delegates who hadn't encountered her species before. But they'll also be constrained by the same thing that makes our alliance possible. They can't afford to alienate too many neutral species simultaneously. Dr. Sina's coloration shifted to what Marcus recognized as concern. You speak with considerable knowledge of major power tactics. What is your background, if I may ask? Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was the moment when Thrix would either have to lie to their new allies or reveal her true identity and risk destroying everything they had built. I am a former intelligence operative, Thrix said calmly. I spent several years working for interests that I came to believe were contrary to the welfare of the galaxy's smaller civilizations. I chose to share my knowledge with those who might use it more wisely. The silence in the room was profound. Marcus watched as each delegate processed the implications of having a former spy as one of their key advisors. Finally, Commander Zelak spoke. Which side did you serve? Does it matter? Thrix asked. Both major powers use similar tactics against neutral species. Both see you as resources to be controlled rather than partners to be respected. My specific former allegiance is less important than my current commitment to helping create a genuine alternative. Ambassador Vex's multifaceted eyes studied Thrix intently. Your presence here puts us all at considerable risk. If your former employers discover your location, they will eventually, Thrix acknowledged. But by then, I hope our alliance will be strong enough to protect itself and its members. The debate that followed was intense, but ultimately brief. The potential benefits of having access to major power intelligence clearly outweighed the risks, especially since those risks existed regardless of Thrix's involvement. If anything, her knowledge might help them avoid the worst potential traps. As the sun rose over Kepler Station, 9 species formally signed the preliminary Kepler Accords, creating the first truly voluntary alliance in galactic history. The documents were deliberately vague about specific commitments, focusing instead on principles and frameworks that could be adapted as the alliance grew and developed. Marcus stood at the observation deck watching the departure of the various delegations, each carrying the news of their historic agreement back to their respective governments. Within days, the existence of the Kepler Alliance would be common knowledge throughout the galaxy, and both major powers would be forced to decide how to respond. Regrets? Thrix asked, joining him at the massive windows that looked out over the docking bays. None, Marcus said without hesitation. Even if this fails, we've proven that there's an alternative to the current system. Other species will know that cooperation is possible. It won't fail, Thrix said with quiet confidence. I've studied the psychological profiles of both major powers for years. They're prepared for military threats and political opposition, but they have no idea how to respond to voluntary cooperation based on mutual respect. Marcus smiled, feeling more optimistic about the future than he had in years. They're about to get an education in human nature. As the last of the alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, Marcus realized that his life as a simple businessman was over forever. He was now the unofficial leader of a galactic revolution, and the decisions he made in the coming months would determine whether his species would help create a new era of interstellar cooperation or be crushed between the grinding wheels of an ancient political machine. Looking at Thrix, the alien spy who had become his closest ally and trusted friend, Marcus felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. They had given the galaxy something it had never had before, hope that there was a third option between dominance and submission. Now they just had to survive long enough to make that hope a reality. 6 months after the Kepler Accords, Marcus stood in the command center of Freedom Station, the mobile headquarters of what had grown from 9 founding species to 27 active members of the Kepler Alliance. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, with each member species contributing their unique technologies to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. The transformation had been remarkable. What began as a trade confederation had evolved into a genuine alternative to the major power blocks, with its own defense force, research initiatives, and diplomatic corps. More importantly, it had proven that voluntary cooperation could be more effective than hierarchical control. The latest intelligence reports, Thrix said, entering the command center with a datapad in her hands. Her appearance had stabilized into what she called her true form, the bronze-skinned being with geometric patterns that Marcus had first seen in his apartment. The Alliance had given her something she had never expected to find, a place where she could be herself without deception. Marcus reviewed the reports with growing satisfaction. The hegemony had attempted to break up the Alliance through economic pressure, offering individual species lucrative deals to abandon the Confederation. Every species had refused, choosing Alliance benefits over short-term gain. The Alliance had tried military intimidation, conducting training exercises near neutral territories. The coordinated response from Alliance defense forces had convinced them that aggression would be costly. Both sides are getting frustrated, Thrix continued. They're running out of conventional options for dealing with us, which means they'll start considering unconventional options, Marcus observed. Are you ready for what's coming? Before Thrix could answer, the communication system activated with an urgent priority signal. Admiral Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister and the commanding officer of the Alliance Defense Force, appeared on the main screen. Marcus, we've got a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements from both major powers. It looks like they've finally decided to end the Alliance through direct action. Marcus felt his stomach drop. They had always known this moment would come, but he had hoped they would have more time to build their strength. How long do we have? 48 hours until the first wave reaches our territory. Both fleets are moving in coordinated patterns, suggesting this is a joint operation. Sarah's expression was grim but determined. They're not just coming for us, Marcus. They're coming for every neutral species in the galaxy. The ultimate test had arrived. Everything they had built, every relationship they had forged, every principle they had established would be put to the ultimate test. Marcus looked around the command center at the representatives, from dozens of species working together with a unity that would have been impossible under either of the major power systems, send the general. Alert to all Alliance members, Marcus ordered. Activate the mutual defense protocols. And get me a direct communication link to every neutral species in the galaxy, whether they're Alliance members or not. As the station erupted into controlled activity, Marcus felt a strange sense of calm settling over him. This was the moment that would define not just the fate of the Kepler Alliance, but the future of galactic civilization itself. "What are you thinking?" Thrix asked, noting his expression. "I'm thinking that the major powers just made the biggest mistake in galactic history," Marcus replied. "They're about to demonstrate to every neutral species in the galaxy exactly why voluntary cooperation is superior to forced submission." Over the next 24 hours, something unprecedented happened. Species that had never been Alliance members began requesting emergency admission. Others offered military support without formal membership. The hegemony and Alliance fleets found their advance slowed by unprecedented cooperation between previously unaligned civilizations. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Instead of massive fleet engagements, it became a complex dance of shifting alliances and tactical cooperation. Alliance forces didn't try to match the major powers in raw firepower. Instead, they used their diversity as a strength, with each species contributing their unique capabilities to a coordinated defense that proved far more effective than the sum of its parts. The Centauri provided advanced shielding technology. The Andromedans contributed their superior sensor arrays. The Vegans offered bioships that could repair themselves in combat. Humanity provided the leadership and coordination that held the diverse coalition together. But the real victory wasn't military. As the major powers found themselves facing united resistance from species they had expected to crush individually, something fundamental shifted in galactic politics. Neutrality was no longer a position of weakness. For the first time in centuries, the smaller civilizations had proven they could defend themselves through cooperation. 3 days after the fleets had first been detected, both the Hegemony and Alliance requested ceasefire negotiations. The cost of breaking the alliance had proven far higher than either side had anticipated, and the political consequences of their failed aggression were spreading throughout their own territories. Marcus stood in the same conference room where the Kepler Accords had been signed, but this time the participants included representatives from both major powers. The negotiation that followed established the legal framework for what historians would later call the Galactic Reformation. The major powers maintained their territorial integrity and internal governance, but they formally recognized the right of neutral species to voluntary association and mutual defense. More importantly, they accepted the alliance as an equal partner in galactic affairs rather than a collection of subjects to be controlled. "How does it feel to have changed the course of galactic civilization?" Thrix asked as they watched the final signatures being applied to the new galactic charter. Marcus considered the question carefully. "It feels like humanity finally found its true purpose in the galaxy. We weren't meant to choose between existing power structures. We were meant to help create something better. And personally, how does it feel to have gone from businessman to galactic statesman?" Marcus smiled, thinking back to the morning when he had first questioned his alien maid's mysterious behavior. "It feels like the best possible outcome from the worst possible discovery. If you had told me 6 months ago that I would become a revolutionary leader, I would have thought you were insane. What about the fact that your revolution started because you fell in love with your enemy?" The question caught Marcus off guard, though he realized he shouldn't have been surprised. Thrix had always been perceptive about emotional undercurrents, and their relationship had evolved far beyond the professional partnership that had created the alliance. "I prefer to think of it as falling in love with someone who chose to become my ally," Marcus replied. "The fact that you were originally my enemy just makes the story more interesting." Thrix laughed, the sound no longer carrying the harmonic resonances of her spy persona, but the genuine warmth of someone who had finally found a place where she belonged. Humans really are unique, aren't they? Any other species would see love between former enemies as a weakness or a complication. We see it as proof that enemies can become family if they're willing to fight for the same things, Marcus said, taking her hand in his. And that's probably the most human thing about our entire revolution. As they stood together watching representatives from 67 different species celebrate the dawn of a new galactic age, Marcus realized that Thrix's surprise had indeed left him speechless. Not because of what she had revealed about herself, but because of what she had revealed about the possibilities that existed when different worlds chose to work together. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in centuries, that was a cause for hope rather than fear. Years later, when historians studied the Galactic Reformation, they would identify the moment when a human businessman questioned his alien maid's behavior as the beginning of the most significant political transformation in galactic history. But Marcus and Thrix knew the truth was both simpler and more complex than the history books would record. The real secret wasn't that an alien spy had infiltrated human society. The real secret was that humanity had always possessed the power to change the galaxy. They had just needed someone to show them how to use it. And sometimes, the most important revelations came from the most unexpected sources, hidden in plain sight until the right moment arrived to change everything.